About 13 years ago, in our church gym, some of the boys in Lightshine got together and sold then high school senior Patrick Hightower into slavery. Well, actually they sold him to Joy and Ed Kidd, who were our church's resident Ishmaelites. Now, they turned around and sold him for a profit, of course, to Evan Baars, otherwise known as Potiphar, one of Egypt's millionaires, which was obviously brilliant casting. And this is where it gets complicated. Things between Evan and Patrick were great for about half of a musical number. But that is when Evan found out that his wife, who was either Jessie Gascoigne, Megan Regal, or Rachel Hefner, depending on the night of the weekend, had tried to seduce Patrick because of his looks and his charm. And before he knew it, he had landed in Pharaoh's prison. Poor Patrick. Playing the role of Joseph was not easy. Sold by his Lightshine brothers and imprisoned, and all only in the first act. At one point, things were so dismal that Patrick, from his makeshift jail cell, sang a song entitled, "Close Every Door to Me." Here he confesses that he wants nothing to do with the world. He feels utterly unloved and thrown away. He is drowning in pain experienced from rejection and betrayal. The door of his heart has been slammed shut, and when the curtain closes, we are all left to wonder if it ever will be opened again. Many of you remember Lightshine's productions of Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. You may not just remember, you may still have props in your garage or in an upstairs closet, as well as scars from set construction and costume design to prove your involvement. Whether you were a member of our church at the time, or like me, a friend of a member of the church, none of us got away unscathed. There were infinite hours of dress rehearsal where the guys, normally soccer, baseball, and cross-country stars, were forced to perfect the can-can kick, or learn all of those many colors most of us had never heard of, like azure and russet, which I still don't really know what they are, or okra, which I thought was just a vegetable that should only be eaten fried with all the right condiments. But I would bet on most days, most of us could still get them all in the right order after all of that time with Maryland's color drills. In those weeks, we all became a part of Joseph's story. And while the miracle of the boys kicking all at the same time, all in the right direction on opening night after a pretty rocky dress rehearsal, seemed like the greatest triumph of the whole affair, these many years later, I have realized the lasting and profound impact this story has had on my life. It is one of the Bible's finest examples of radical love. And in this place, I was given the opportunity to participate in it. Joseph taught us, even as we sang and danced, that faithfulness and forgiveness go hand in hand. Being faithful to God means forgiving those who have hurt us, even when the pain that we have felt is so great that, like Joseph, we would rather close off our heart altogether. Forgiveness is born out of radical love. Radical because it is risky and doesn't make sense to this world. Radical because it requires that the one who has been harmed must reach out in love, nonetheless. Now, we learned these things from Joseph as he reached out and saved his brothers from famine and death, those same brothers who had sold him into slavery. Sometimes stories, even the stories in the Bible, seem well and good in theory, but in practice, in real life, we wonder how they could ever be possible. How are we supposed to live this kind of radical love in our lives? Many days when I am struggling with this very question, knowing what I should do, but feeling like I simply don't have it in me to actually do it. I remember a friend that I have in South Africa. I found out early on in our acquaintance that her nephew murdered her son. Once when I was at her house, she introduced me to this young man whom she called her nephew. Surely, I thought to myself, this is not the nephew, the one who killed her boy. So later I asked her, Johanna, that boy, that nephew at your home, that's not... And I didn't even have to finish the question. Her face changed, and in a moment of anguish and love mixed together with tears rolling down her face, she whispered, yes, yes, it is. For years, she has given him shelter and clothes and food and money for the doctor. This nephew who took her own son's life. Why? I must have asked her in my shock. And she said, because I can't help but remember Jesus needing a place to lay his head. Radical love that is risky and painful and will sooner bring us to our knees than send us over the moon with bliss. But this is love. I have been a preacher for about 3 years, and still I am surprised most weeks when I read the lectionary text. More often than not, it feels as if I am reading the passage for the first time. Now, this can't be true, not at least officially, because I was required to read the whole Bible while I was in seminary. And while I will admit to skimming chunks of Leviticus and Chronicles and Numbers, don't tell anyone, I don't remember skipping Romans. I mean, after all, it is one of the shorter books. But I have no memory of chapter 13. And surely I would have remembered these words. Owe no one anything except to love one another. For the one who loves the other has fulfilled the law. And every commandment is summed up in this word, love your neighbor as yourself. It is a rephrasing of Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 22, when Jesus is asked, "Which commandment in the law is the greatest?" And he said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." Normally, I don't have a lot of time for Paul. Perhaps wrongly, I give him a hard time, because it seems that so many of his words are used by Christians to justify all that we fight about in the church, whether it is the roles or lack thereof of women in worship, or the degree of sinfulness on a plethora of issues, homosexuality at the top of that list. But Paul is more often used to divide God's people than to bring us together. Encountering this text was just the wake-up call that I needed. A reminder that bits and pieces of the Bible, a verse here, a verse there, should never be used as a weapon to justify prejudice or hate. But all the commandments, all the instruction given to us through this holy revelation are summed up in this word: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. Love is not about a feeling. It has little to do with emotion, not at least according to Paul. Instead, it is about behavior. We know that we are loved not by what is said to us, but by how we are treated. We love our neighbors through our actions and not by empty words. And Jesus has already told us who our neighbors really are. Not just those who share our pews or our opinions on politics, not just those who agree to believe in the same God that we do, not just those who make love easy. But Jesus says that any human being that we come into contact with, every single person, is our neighbor. Family and friends, of course, but also included are the strangers that we meet, the person from the other side of town, the drivers in the cars next to us on the road, and even our enemies. If we want to fulfill the law, if we want and desire to be faithful to God at all, we must first do this. We must commit to love before we move on to anything else. Next month, I head to Afghanistan with a group of about 200 U.S. soldiers. The 14th Military Intelligence Battalion, which I am a part of, is one of 2 battalions in the Army whose main purpose is interrogating prisoners who are being detained by our government as enemies of the United States. A few weeks ago, while reading through my specialized job description for Afghanistan, I came across a list of persons for whom I will provide religious support. U.S. soldiers, U.S. contractors, Allied soldiers, Allied contractors, Afghan civilians, and detainees. Seeing this in writing caught me a little off guard. I had heard that as a chaplain, I would be the only person in my unit with universal access to the prison, but up to that moment, I still figured I would have little to do with them.